questions and discussions on specific topics related to the research that staff has been conducting. This research is available on our webpage, which is linked in one of the slides at the end. A reminder, this meeting will be recorded and posted online. We ask that you hold all questions till the end, please. All right, a brief agenda for our meeting today. We'll start with a brief overview of the purpose of a comprehensive plan and then a project overview and timeline. And the bulk of today is really focused on the research and topic information related to the individual elements under review, and then questions and discussion. So before we get started, we wanted to set the stage with what a comprehensive plan is. The purpose of a comprehensive plan is to guide coordinated and harmonious development. It's general in nature and with its goals, objectives, and maps provides long-range recommendations for the general development of land. The development of comprehensive plans is required by the Code of Virginia, and they only provide guidance and recommendations and are not law like the zoning ordinance. The policy plan includes goals, objectives, and policies. Goals provide the general direction of the plan. Objectives include statements to help achieve those goals. And finally, policies include specific approaches for pursuing an objective. The policy plan does apply county-wide, therefore it's important to ensure that the policies developed are general and flexible enough to apply across the county. The Board of Supervisors authorized the consideration of a comprehensive plan amendment to update the countywide policy plan. We're currently in phase 1 of this effort, which includes updating the introduction, land use, transportation, environment, parks and recreation, and human services elements, and incorporating policies for community health and equity, which we'll hear more about today. The goals of this update are to align with the strategic plan in One Fairfax, update existing policies, and add new policies. We have a project timeline. Currently, we are at the end of our second phase of outreach, which did begin this past fall. Our meeting today is intended to continue on the outreach conducted last summer and fall and is informed by the research papers that were recently published on our webpage. We'll be taking all feedback and recommendations that we've received to date, including those that we receive at the meeting today, and we'll incorporate them into a community feedback report, which we anticipate releasing in March. And today, we're here to provide information regarding staff's research findings and how they relate to policy changes. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the staff team working on this project.
Thank you, Corrine. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Salem Bush, and I also work in the planning department with Corrine. And I am the topic lead for the preface or introduction chapter of the policy plan. And so really just kind of starting with thinking about what the intent of the actual policy plan introduction is. What is it supposed to do? Why is it used? How is it used? So really telling the bigger picture within the introduction is important about how the comp plan is used. So how the policy plan elements, which are all the elements that we're looking at updating now, relate to the area plans, which is another section of the comprehensive plan that Corrine kind of just described, how it works with those, how it works within how we do a lot of plan amendments in the planning division, how we go through development review process for new projects and development across the county, and then also kind of how it relates to the concept for future development, which is another part of the comprehensive plan that we use for guiding development in our mixed use centers of the county. The other and probably most important thing I think the introduction does is it establishes an overarching set of goals for the policy plan and really for the entire comprehensive plan. And so one thing we were looking at in this update is just providing more context on those goals. So really not just the goals themselves, but what are the issues that are related to the goals? What are the land use issues? And how can we develop new goals to go about helping solve some of those issues through the comprehensive plan goals and policies? And then also providing more, I think another important part of the introduction is just providing more context about the planning process. And so how the county goes about implementing the comprehensive plan, how we monitor or review the comprehensive plan to make sure that it's doing what we hope it's intended to do through the goals that we have set up. And then also how we go through the planning process and provide citizen participation. So ways that the community can be engaged in our planning process as well. Next slide, please. And then just a little more specifically drilling down on some of those things. Some of the stuff when we were looking at updating this plan was really, again, kind of focusing on what the intent of that plan is. And so I think just improving the flow of the introduction and preface is important, focusing really on that intent. And so moving some sections that are currently in the plan that really, I don't think provide the context that you really want and really get to the main points include, some sections like the state code proffer section, the history section. While it's still important, it takes up a lot of space and it doesn't really get to the main driving point. So kind of moving those sections to appendixes so they can still be referenced. And then also another thing is just modernizing a lot of the language and introducing some of the new planning and land use priorities that we deal with today, as opposed to when this plan was originally enacted. And so we've been looking at updating the context of the document to reflect more recent trends and issues facing the county. Talking more about what the purpose of our concept for future development is and why we focus so much about development within the mixed use centers. There's a lot of positives to it and reasons why we do that. And so adding that context into that introduction is important. And then shifting to kind of how we talk about things like equity and related to the planning process, other things like healthy communities. So really thinking about how we actually provide access for residents, for community members to various land uses and amenities that contribute to quality of life for all residents. So these are things like affordable housing, employment opportunities, commercial services, public facilities, parks and recreation, healthy communities, and other services. So these are the things that really make a much more higher quality of life for people in Fairfax County. So how do we provide access to people for that? So that's definitely a tone that we're trying to set in the introduction. And then another important part, and again, is developing that land use vision and then a revised set of goals to reflect current day priorities. Next slide, please. And just real quickly, this is some of the things that we went through when we were talking about, when we were kind of meeting as staff. We have a bunch of different agencies involved in this, kind of going through the Planning Commission and board, and also going through initial community outreach on this project. These are some of the key things that came up as we were thinking about developing a new land use vision and a new set of goals. And so the biggest thing everyone agreed upon was aligning that with a countywide strategic plan, developing a new land use vision statement, and that the goals should be visionary and set a high level expectation of what we would like the county to be like in the future. And then establishing an overarching land use goal that is kind of the first goal that sets the other goals in another direction. And then establishing new goals for equity and healthy communities. So those aren't currently reflected in our comp plan today. And then thinking about transportation is more focus on an urban design and a streetscape and multimodal design concept. So not just kind of automobile focused. And then last but not least, and very important, is recognizing and establishing a tone that all these goals that we're talking about are interrelated and should not be considered outside of the context of other goals. And I think you'll see that pretty clearly within the goals and within the tone and narrative of the goals. Next slide, please. So again, this is the land use vision that we've taken out to the community so far. We've taken through the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. And so this is the draft vision that we have now. And it is the county will plan for growth by providing diverse housing options, ample employment and business opportunities, essential services, and preserve a natural environment for future generations. Communities will be designed to be safe, walkable, and well-connected by multimodal transportation options with cultural, recreational, and healthy spaces that foster a sense of place and ensure a high quality of life for all people. Next slide, please. And then quickly, I'll point out this is the new set of goals. And again, these tie very much into the 10 community outcome areas of the countywide strategic plan with really a lens and a focus on land use, specifically in the context of comprehensive plan planning. So I won't go over all the details of these goals. If you check out our website, you can actually, there's an accompanying narrative for each one of these that goes into more depth about some of the things what we're looking for through these goals. But these are the set of goals here. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Slott with DPD. I'm the Equity Program Manager for the department. I wanted to just start with the board. Part of the board's direction to us during the policy plan update is incorporating the One Fairfax policy into the policy plan that we're writing. The One Fairfax policy, which was adopted in 2016, gave us guidance for incorporating and directed staff to incorporate equity into all policy making and planning that we do as the county. That was in 2016, and then as a follow-up in 2020, in order to better understand the drivers of inequity, the county put together something that was called the Chairman's Task Force on Race and Equity. And part of the Chairman's Task Force, part of their report, they came up with a definition for equitable development. And so the definition is Fairfax County is a place where all people live in communities of opportunity with the ability to engage fully in decisions that affect their lives and neighborhoods. Next slide. Thank you. And so to further define this and what this looks like for Fairfax County, we have a couple of sources to look to as a framework for ourselves. One, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, COG, as we call it. COG last year adopted the regional equitable development principles. We have members of the board of our Fairfax County Board of Supervisors that is part of the board for COG, and so they were part of the membership that adopted this for the region as a whole. There are several other jurisdictions that have actually adopted these principles as part of their the work that they do. We are looking to the regional equitable development principles as a guide to understand how we can further incorporate equitable development into the planning that we do. You'll see that some of the principles outlined here, like expanding affordable housing and people-centered, mobility, connectivity, there are principles and goals that we have already related to that, and the county does a lot of work on some of these principles. Some of the other principles leave a little bit to be explored still. For example, the prevent residential, commercial, and cultural displacement. Next slide. Furthermore, the strategic plan that the county adopted gives some direction for how to incorporate the One Fairfax policy and how to implement the One Fairfax policy in the county. And so the access to opportunity framework is what was laid out in the strategic plan for us. And so the access to opportunity is a key consideration in the strategic plan. And based on these principles, which is understanding opportunity and vulnerability, and that means really looking at data that we have, experiences that we have. There have been some tools developed at the county to help us understand opportunity and vulnerability. The next step is targeting interventions to build opportunity, targeting interventions to connect opportunity, and then encouraging the development of an inclusive economy. Next slide. This is just an example. I provided a couple of examples for the principles from the strategic plan that relate to this. I'm not obviously going to read through them all, but you can take a look at them. Some of them speak to, for example, specifically to displacement. There's certainly some strategic plan principles related to healthy communities, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The policy plan will be having an entire element related to health. And so that also falls under the umbrella of equity. We'll be incorporating equity into the policy plan throughout the different elements rather than creating a new element. And so this is just some of the principles that are laid out for us already in the county to give us direction for how to move forward. Next slide. So just briefly, here are some of the draft recommendations. They're pretty kind of wide-ranging. The first one, which Salem talked about a little bit, which was including an overarching equitable development policy plan principle related to equity into the plan to ensure access to opportunity. Strengthen the policy plan commitment to inclusive community engagement. We do have a short section in the policy plan in the introduction around community engagement, and we'd like to strengthen that and deepen our work on that. Next slide. 3 is the big one that work is starting to and will continue to happen throughout the process for this plan, including through public hearings, which is create policy plan objectives in all of the policy plan elements that recommend the use of appropriate tools, often data-based tools, to support the communities of opportunity framework, which is that access to opportunity that we talked about earlier. Specifically, we'll be including some objectives in the land use element based on the strategic plan related to displacement. And we think we need to do a little more study to fully understand what commercial and residential displacement in Fairfax County looks like, and to see where we're missing tools and policy tools for the county that can help prevent displacement. There often tools are not necessarily something that's incorporated into the policy plan, but a way to implement the policy plan. And so we have tools at the county related to, for example, displacement related to affordable housing. And you'll hear a little bit later, land use has explored a little bit of information related to retail displacement. And we'd like to look at that a little bit closer to understand kind of the full complement of what we're talking about. And that's, thank you.
Hi, thanks, Michelle. My name is Anna Ricklin. I'm with the Fairfax County Health Department, and I am the lead for developing the content related to community health for the comprehensive plan, policy plan. So I want to just start with saying that good land use planning can strengthen public health. We see that both public health and urban planning have a shared history, and they both have a core aim to improve quality of life. And we also know through many studies over the past couple of decades that planning and urban design can have a significant impact on our health over the long term, over our lifetimes, by influencing things like how and where we exercise, what food choices available, of course, air and water quality, and where and how people can connect to one another. Next. And like the equity topic, we want to look at using health data to inform our policy development. So this is one example of some of the data that we're looking at. This is life expectancy by census tract across the county. We see that there is a pretty significant disparity between some of our census tracts and others. So for example, if you look at that census tract in McLean, folks are living to almost 90 years old, whereas in one of the census tracts in the Fair Oaks area, there's a 13-year gap where folks are living only till about 76 years old. So that's pretty significant gap. And it's something to look at when we're thinking about how to prioritize the types of policies and objectives that we're putting into this plan, as we know that this has a place-based component to the data. Next. So we are looking at 5 buckets, essentially, and an opportunity to develop a full Healthy Communities chapter for the plan. So you can see on the left, establish a standalone Healthy Communities element with 5 categories and interwoven equity throughout each of those 5 categories. So the first one is promoting active living. So that's things like outdoor recreation, so parks and playgrounds, as well as active transportation. So in the image here, bike lanes and walking routes to help people get to where they need to go safely and without having to use a car every single time. That also helps us connect to bus and metro better. The second area is growing our food system. So thinking both about food production. People might think, oh, farmers markets like in the picture here, but we're also thinking about where is our food grown? How far does our food have to travel? In what conditions are we enabling people to grow food? So starting to think more creatively about the different environments, maybe indoor even, for food production when we talk about urban farming, as well as where we're locating farmers markets and the availability of fresh food in neighborhoods. Next slide. And then the third section is looking at social connections and how people can be more connected to one another. And so there we're thinking about placemaking in neighborhoods. Small scale placemaking can be really impactful for giving people places to connect that aren't their home, aren't our place where you have to buy something like a coffee shop, and or aren't another place of transaction like a mall, for example. So what are some ways that we can embed more places in our communities for people to connect with one another, and at the same time remove barriers to connection, such as really big roads without crosswalks, are a barrier to connection. The fourth section is enhancing green infrastructure and climate health. And in this area, we're looking at things like the urban heat island and how that impacts health. We see that in different parts of the county, sometimes those areas of the county with less opportunity, there is a worse heat island effect in the summertime because of more impervious pavements and just more pavement in general. And then green infrastructure, we're thinking about not just trees and stormwater, but also ways that we can have connected areas of greenery between both trees and shrubs and just green space that offer both a cooler environment and something calmer for our eyes and our minds and our social and emotional health. And then finally, of course, if we're building a healthy community, we have to ensure access to healthcare and human services. And here we're thinking both about hospital healthcare, like we have the example in the image, but also about clinics and doctors' offices and other human services that may be provided by the county or some of our nonprofit partners that really support our residents in ensuring they can thrive as to their greatest potential. And I think that wraps up. Oh, and I do want to say across the bottom, prioritizing health equity across all of this. So looking to our health data as we're to inform the policies and objectives that we're developing in each section. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening or good afternoon, excuse me, everyone. My name is Michael Burton. I'm with the Department of Planning and Development. And I'm representing the team considering updates to the land use section of the comprehensive plan. For context, the land use element of the policy plan contains a number of countywide objectives and policies that are organized into really 6 broad categories. And that includes land use pattern, land use intensity, the pace of development, land use compatibility, and conservation. In total, there are about 17 objectives with associated policies divided across each of those categories. In addition to these policies and objectives, there are currently 14 appendices that provide guidelines to address more specific land use topics, such as office repurposing, for example. Our team are in the process of reviewing the objectives and policies in this section to determine if there are any redundancies with other county policies, how the existing objectives or policies may need to be updated or organized, and whether new objectives or policies should be or could be considered based on growing trends. Next slide, please. So as part of the policy plan review effort and the identification of emerging trends, the Department of Planning and Development has retained a consultant, Clarion, to complete a review of office, industrial, and retail land use trends. Clarion examined national and regional trends to determine if and or how land could be retained or converted to other uses, particularly as it relates to the potential displacement of existing uses such as retail or industrial. Next slide, please. So when looking at office uses, recommendations provided in the Clarion report focused on adapting the county's approach to office conversions in response to current trends and market conditions. It's no secret that the aging office space has been under increased pressure even before the pandemic, which really only exacerbated some of that redevelopment pressure. Appendix 13 is an existing appendices in the policy plan, was adopted in 2017, and it provides guidelines for the repurposing of older commercial office buildings that may be outdated or unable to compete with newer buildings located in more attractive areas like transit accessible activity centers or buildings that are are struggling to be leased just because of their age and they've become obsolete. While the existing guidance in this appendices aligns with national best practices, the high demand for housing and low demand for office and the change of circumstances since the adoption of the appendices in 2017 have really highlighted the need for a more proactive and detailed approach to how we think about office conversions. Clarion has also proposed additional criteria for inclusion in the appendices. These new criteria would build upon the existing performance measures in the policy plan and provide expanded considerations to better assess office repurposing requests. The expanded criteria includes things like location, class and age of the office space, proximity to rail transit, proximity to amenities and necessities, and whether or not it's located in a revitalization area, and whether there's an inclusion of affordable workforce housing, or whether the office structure, the existing office structure, should be repurposed or replaced entirely. Next slide, please. For the industrial use report, Clarion recommends that the retention of existing industrial land in designated industrial areas be retained to the extent practicable. The county has limited industrial land available, and underutilized land consists of smaller parcels. These smaller parcels can provide space for high-tech manufacturing, small-scale artisanal production, and limited space such as light industrial firms. In some circumstances, smaller parcels can be consolidated for redevelopment. The report also highlights the 3 areas designated as industrial on the concept for future development. This includes Beltway South, the I-95 corridor, and Ravensworth. And it recommends a potential plan amendment to review and update policies for these 3 areas to discourage the conversion of industrial land to residential uses. The report also recommends reviewing and considering updates to the comprehensive plan for the Tysons Urban Center and the Dulles Suburban Center, as well as other transit station areas located along the Orange and Silver lines. They recommend to clarify the intent to maintain and preserve concentrations of industrial uses or to encourage their conversion to other uses when applicable. The report also highlights existing plan policies and its relevance to requests to replan industrial land to allow for residential development, recommending that the policies be amended to ensure plan amendment nominations that want to convert industrial land to residential be tied to commensurate community benefits. These amendments should be really high standards, meet the high end of the density range, and be subject to additional criteria. The report also notes that a higher percentage of affordable units could be recommended in these areas, or affordable units could be recommended to reach a lower threshold of AMI, or area median income. Next slide, please. Finally, when looking at the retail report, Clarion recommends in their focus on vacant retail space, they do recommend that we look into opportunities to leverage vacant commercial space for alternative uses. First, they suggest that the county could consider policies, develop agreements and/or incentives to discourage the displacement of existing viable retail enterprises, specifically when there's a proposal for site redevelopment in vulnerable communities. This could allow for both the replacement of outmoded retail development and the preservation of retail outlets. Potential policy and programmatic considerations could include policies to prevent or minimize displacement, right of return, community benefit agreements, relocation assistance, or other county programs or incentives. Second, the county could clarify locations for specifically for ground floor retail as a part of the policy plan and area plans. While Clarion was not able to provide a specific amount of retail that they thought might be warranted or needed in terms of ground floor space, they did identify considerations for where ground floor retail should or could be located. Potential keys to ground floor retail success include location along major streets, transit corridors with good pedestrian and non-motorized access, having a critical mass of residents and/or office workers nearby, and transit planning that would employ a metric to determine if enough density exists to be able to support ground floor retail in certain areas. The use of market studies was also suggested as they could help inform areas for retail based on demographics and income, localized income. The other two items listed, expanding allowable uses for struggling commercial areas and encouraging retail conversions with expanded criteria, were identified in the report, with the recognition that the county already has policies and regulations in place to help support this, particularly related to adding housing to commercially zoned areas and using Appendices 13 in the policy plan to support the conversions of retail into other uses. Lastly, Clarion recommended additional criteria to review these requests absent a plan amendment. So the reports were fairly extensive, and there were a lot of recommendations to summarize in the presentation. But these presentations, or the reports rather, are accessible on the Plan Forward webpage should you want to dive into the recommendations a bit further. As I noted earlier, staff will continue to think about how best to incorporate these ideas from the report and to what extent. And with that, I am through. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. I am Carly Aubrey with DPD, and I'm one of the co-leads for the update of the environment element. So the environment element right now contains countywide objectives and policies, and they are organized into 5 broad categories that are listed here. And within these categories, there are a total of 13 objectives and associated policies. And there is also an appendix with guidelines for tidal shoreline erosion control measures. So over the past few months, we have reviewed the policies and have identified areas where there is either room for improvement, where the scope of an objective or policy could be broadened, or where environmental concerns have risen to the forefront since the last policy plan update. And we are also looking to incorporate recommendations and research papers prepared by staff, which we will speak to on the next few environmental slides. Next slide. So one of the research papers we looked at was the topic was for stormwater management policies. And as part of this, we researched adopted plans, policies, and codes at state and county levels that address stormwater management. And we also looked at examples of comprehensive plan policies from other jurisdictions. And in terms of policy recommendations, we have identified the following areas that are shown here, and I will highlight just a few of these. For climate resiliency, we want to better recognize different types of flooding hazards and develop policies in coordination with applicable county staff and plans, such as Resilient Fairfax. And we will also develop and or identify existing policies that can mitigate issues such as urban heat island impacts. And those measures could be green roofs, increased tree conservation and plantings, etc., that would also have stormwater benefits. For equitable development and community health, we would develop and or identify existing policies and stormwater management techniques that could emphasize health benefits and, where applicable, provide the greatest benefits in vulnerable communities. And then another example is for salt management. We'll look to encourage salt management plans on development sites. And for uses with cooling systems, we'll encourage the monitoring of cooling system discharges into wastewater systems, or encourage the use of alternative cooling systems. Next slide, please. Another research paper we looked at was for green building policies. And so while the current comprehensive plan green building policies address short and long-term impacts on the environment and building occupants, there are areas that could be further strengthened to align with climate goals, county plans, regional efforts, and also formalized practices that have been implemented through the development review process for applications such as rezonings and special exceptions. So policy update recommendations include those listed here. One example is to have a more specific focus on zero waste strategies for waste reduction and future diversion strategies. Also, an increased focus on renewable energy sources within projects, including on-site generation of energy. And then seek to have minimum certification at the LEED Silver level, and also explore the potential inclusion of linkages to specific credits related to climate and resiliency concepts. and also a focus on emission reduction credits or rating systems that strongly emphasize energy efficiency. Go to the next slide, please. The final paper that we prepared was for conservation corridors. Conservation corridors can be defined as linear strips of vegetation that serve as natural links between core habitat areas and allow for the movement of birds, animals, and humans, etc. So in terms of policy recommendations, we have identified the following areas that are listed. And again, I'll just highlight a few. Through coordination with appropriate stakeholders, we would like to establish a countywide natural infrastructure and conservation connectivity network for use in the land development review process. And then at the site level, corridor planning level, look at existing or potential conservation corridor areas adjacent to a proposed development site. Identify those, and then in terms of site design, have the tree preservation, native landscaping, the green infrastructure, and other environmental features within a site. Encourage those to be located adjacent to potential corridor areas. And then finally, just to highlight, improving existing policies. Some of the policies we have, go back to corridors, sorry. So some of the existing policies we have could be implemented through a lens of establishing or enhancing corridors. And then also have greater clarity in the environmental quality corridor policy that the EQCs are not just limited to stream valley core components, but also some upland areas. And this would help further meet the EQC purposes of habitat quality and connectivity. Final slide now. And then this is just to highlight some of the other areas that we're looking at. In terms of lighting, our current lighting policy is focused on its impacts to humans. So we would like to expand that to consider impacts to plants and wildlife. And then the healthy soils. Right now, our current soils policy is focused on soils that are problematic to development. So we would want to establish more, provide more information and have policies that would recognize the importance of healthy soils for plant health, water infiltration, and biodiversity. We would like to have greater recognition and additional policy language for the incorporation of native vegetation. And then finally, for community health and development, community health and equity, develop and or identify existing policies that provide community health and equity benefits. And that's the conclusion of the environment update. So I'll turn it to the next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Stewart, and I'm a senior planner with the Fairfax County Department of Planning and Development, and I'm one of the co-leads in the Parks and Recreation Policy Plan Amendment. Just to speak real quickly on the role of parks and recreation, the adopted policy plan speaks to this and the important role that the park system plays in the quality of life for Fairfax County residents. This guidance is twofold. The first is in providing for the county's health and recreational needs. And secondly, looking at the stewardship of land, natural resources, and cultural resources that have been entrusted to the county's care through its park system. The guidance also includes detailed design guidelines for parks and recreational facilities, typologies and the function of parks to include those parks in our suburban and urban areas, land acquisition guidance and the criteria for acquiring new parks, and then also population-based service level standards that describe the types of amenities that should be provided to meet the community's needs. In September of 2023, the Fairfax County Park Authority adopted its new Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Access Strategy, or PROSA for short. It's a high-level approach to identifying and prioritizing future investments in the park system, and it's data-driven, used to inform these types of decisions through an equity lens, which my colleague Michelle spoke about earlier in the presentation. So in terms of this update, we're updating the policy plan in two phases. Phase one is a minor editorial update, primarily to implement PROSA strategies as they relate to our countywide land use planning. In phase two, which will require some additional data and study to be conducted, we'll be focusing on those service level and design standards I mentioned, as well as how the county manages its natural and cultural resources. Next slide, please. So I won't go into great detail here on this slide. On the timeline, you can see here, this generally tracks with the overall phase 1 for the policy plan amendment as a whole as it comes to outreach and developing the draft guidance. But I will focus here where it says phase 2, and you can kind of see some of the things that we are looking at in terms of that phase 2 update, where we really see the bulk of the updates to occur. The Park Authority is just now beginning its next needs assessment, which is a community survey effort designed to gauge how well the current complement of parks and recreational amenities meet the public needs, and then also how it can adapt to meet emerging needs and recreational trends for the future. The Park Authority will also be updating what's known as its Park System Master Plan, which is the overall blueprint for the agency, and also its 5-year strategic plan and other operational plans, such as its natural resource management plan, cultural resource management plan, and other operational type of documents that will ultimately inform the updates to any changes in the comprehensive plan in phase 2. And so that's a kind of a roadmap of where we are going. But again, the phase 1 is an editorial update to bring the comprehensive plan in line with the PROSA guidance, and phase 2 will be more of a larger update, looking at all of the other operational guidance and strategic direction from the Park Authority. Next slide, please. So to speak just a little bit about our process strategy and how that's being woven into the comprehensive plan, as I mentioned, PROSA is a data-driven strategy with a focus on equitable park access. It's used to guide how the Park Authority prioritizes its capital investments, and it really has 4 major areas of focus. The first is that all county residents live within a 10-minute walk to a Park Authority park. It's not enough simply to have a park nearby, but that the community should be able to access that park safely, and that the park provides valuable amenities and experiences once there. And so it looks at everything from how folks are getting to a park to kind of what they're doing when they're there. With that in mind, we're looking at this through the second goal of having complete park access and access to complete park experiences. Now, what do we mean by that? It's the goal of providing a balance of recreational experiences and diverse amenities that serve a broad range of residents. These include active recreation, such as your playgrounds, your athletic fields, your rec centers and things of that nature, but also looking at passive and contemplative, I cannot say that word, I'm sorry, passive recreational amenities, such as trails, places to socialize, benches, things of that nature, so you can still get out and enjoy your park in a more passive way. Looking at social opportunities and opportunities to really provide for the community to gather, and then also natural and cultural recreation as well. On that side of things, my colleague Carly just mentioned that the habitat corridors and connectivity are a focus in the environmental element. And as the county's major landowner, nearly 10% of the county land is part of the park system. You can see that the need for providing that habitat connectivity and environmental corridors will be part of the parks element as well. And then the last goal here I have is just analyzing and prioritizing recreational needs and projects with an equity lens. As my colleague Michelle mentioned earlier, it is ensuring that all members of the community are receiving value from the park system and have access to quality amenities, and then reinvesting in those areas of the county that may be more vulnerable according to our vulnerability index, or that have historically not received the same level of reinvestment as other areas of the county as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Taylor Waymeyer from the Transportation Planning section of the Fairfax County Department of Transportation. The county's vision for the multimodal transportation system includes efficient, affordable, and safe movement for residents, businesses, visitors, and goods to ensure accessibility and safety for all users. Next slide. A multimodal transportation system will provide choices and balance efficiency across all modes of transportation. This may include a well-designed and maintained networks of roads, sidewalks, trails, and transit options that accommodate diverse needs, as well as by updating existing transportation policy to address increased development, population growth, and travel demand. Next slide, please. We completed 3 focused topic research papers to support this effort. The first, the CTA, or Comprehensive Transportation Analysis, aims to update the approach to transportation impact studies to better account for trade-offs between travel modes and align with broader mobility goals. This framework prioritizes context-sensitive solutions and establishes performance measures to support balanced multimodal transportation systems. This includes adding metrics such as the new pedestrian level of comfort, bicycle level of traffic stress, and vehicle miles traveled. Next slide, please. The second is the Complete Streets and Active Transportation. Fairfax County is committed to promoting equity in transportation through the implementation of Complete Streets, which prioritize comfortable, accessible, and multimodal transportation for all users. A few key considerations include amenity zones, street furniture, and placemaking. Next slide. And the third is microtransit, micromobility, and autonomous vehicles. So these are emerging transportation technologies that transform how people move by addressing last mile challenges and improving access, efficiency, and connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for that. I know that was a lot of information. We appreciate you bearing with us to get through it. We do have some time for questions and discussion, but understanding that that was a lot of information and some people might prefer some time to digest, we do have a central email address where we are tracking all feedback received. That is at the that is at the bottom of this page here, planforwardffx@publicinput.com. We also do have a survey live that's on our project webpage, and we encourage, if you haven't already taken that, to please do so. And with that, I will open the floor to questions. I asked the staff team that if a question is in your wheelhouse, that you just go ahead and speak to it so that we save some time on passing the baton. Thank you. I believe Sonia Brehe's first.
Great. Thanks so much, Sonia Brehe. I am with the Coalition for Smarter Growth. I appreciate these presentations. It was a lot of information. We've been tracking this for a while now as it's been going along. I think a lot of these were based on recommendations coming out of the white papers. It's sort of, I think it sounds great. There's a lot of great recommendations. I think what my question would be is, when will we actually see what's being proposed for the policy plan? And are we going to have an opportunity to review the draft language and provide feedback before it goes to hearings? That timeline looked really tight, and we're still not, I know you guys are still taking feedback on what folks, our responses to some of these recommendations and stuff, but when were we going to know? And I hope we'll have the opportunity to look and review draft plan language before the hearings, because we know it's sort of, once we get to hearing, it's kind of set in stone almost, and tweaked around the edges. But I'm interested to see what's going to be coming out of all of these recommendations. Also, I don't believe I've seen any of the transportation research papers. I see there's a lot of land use, community health, and some of these other ones that got posted. I was wondering if there was going to be, I feel like in prior presentations, they talked about different topics that were going to be researched, but I wasn't sure if there was going to be a formal report coming out of the transportation stuff. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So the papers that we talked about today and that you mentioned are the first step to getting the draft policy written. So some of the papers have actual recommendations in them, not plan text, but recommendations for what we'll be doing. So now that these are out, we're working on actually drafting that plan text. The goal right now is to release draft text ahead of going to Planning Commission committee discussions. We have a date list of those on our webpage, but our intention is to release draft text ahead of that. So that would be this spring, and that would give us time still before the targeted public hearings in the fall for people to respond to the draft language.
Yeah, but will there be another community meeting opportunity? I mean, even this circumstance, we've got 10 minutes for question and answer. And is this going to be the last time you're coming to the community, or is there going to be another round?
No, so we have a community outreach plan that includes a community feedback report that we're going to be working on after these meetings. And once we finish that community feedback report, we'll be going back out to the community with a check-in on that. And so I'm happy to talk to you more offline about those details, but I see we have a couple other hands, so I do want to give others the opportunity to ask questions. I think Mary Payton.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mary Payton. I'm with the Fairfax NACP. Let me get my camera on so I can, there. And I live on the Route 1 corridor where we have a ongoing embark plan for transit-oriented development, but it's sort of a gentrification plan so far that's in some ways endangering some of our minority communities. And I'm just wondering, I'm really glad you did an equity paper and an equity set of recommendations, but I'm wondering how you might incorporate some of those goals with some of the transit-oriented development goals, in particular because when you build something like a BRT station, the land values around that government built amenity seem to go up, which is what's happening around here. The land values go up, and it will force out the local businesses, a lot of local people who've owned homes around here for a long time, and transform some of the areas where there's been renters and have a community. We've got a real growing Hispanic community along here. We've got a very old, oldest Black continuously occupied community. And we've got BRT stations right next to both of them. So how can you raise the land values and at the same time encourage local business and local people who are already here and already diverse and already engaged in enterprises to remain and be helped by this project rather than be displaced? That's a question, I think, for the land use person.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah, it's a really important question, Mary, and it's something that we're continuing to think about in terms of what policies we can put in place. Some of what the report suggested was programmatic, right? Additional initiatives or support services that could help existing businesses in the community, and that goes beyond the comprehensive plan in some ways. I'm sure that you're already aware, as a part of our process, we don't necessarily take or able to take into account the potential change in the value of a property. We know that it absolutely can happen, but what that change is, when it happens, how development happens, we're never certain of when that might take place. So one of the things that we can do is that if we know we're seeing development interest in vulnerable areas, particularly areas where there may be lower incomes or vulnerable populations for a number of reasons. As a part of our study, we can make sure that that is highlighted and raised to the Planning Commission and the board as a consideration. And then we can think about, in our working with the development community or with private developers on ways to try to preserve some of that existing retail space if they're serving. And I'm speaking to retail specifically, right? Some of that existing retail or commercial space if they serve those vulnerable communities directly.
Okay, I would just one follow-up. I would say you do know where the development's going to take place because you're creating it when you put in the BRT stations or various. You plan to put various things that's going to make the land more valuable around it. So you do know that, and you are causing it in a way. So you can plan ahead for that.
Yeah, we know the areas that we're planning. Absolutely. It's the timing and the value change that's sort of the unanswered question, right? From a policy perspective, we don't always know if and when land is going to change, right? We have policies in place across the county and the land has remained the same in places like Annandale and Seven Corners, Bailey's, right? Other places where there's definitely a more vulnerable population. And so it's hard to tie at least from a policy perspective, decisions to a potential change in value. But to your point, right, we know the spaces that we're looking to grow. We know that there's a vulnerable population there. So if there are other measures that we can take to protect the services or the folks that live in those areas in some way, that's something that we could continue to raise as a part of our as a part of the policy effort. So part of this is case by case, Mary, as different projects come in. But we're also trying to think about this as at a policy level, which is why we're working with Michelle, who is our equity lead, to see how we can incorporate that into the land use section.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
We'd be glad to work with you on that too. NACP is very interested in that, how this policy comes out.
Happy to. We'll if you don't have my information, it's Michael, MICHAEL.Burton, BURTON at fairfaxcounty.gov. We can set something up, Mary.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Larry was next.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you for all the work you put into this. It's clear that that there are at least some areas where you've incorporated community input based on comment that was offered last year. I want to highlight on some high-level comments. One is there seems to be some inconsistency in the description of what is going to happen. In some cases, you talk about ensuring things happen. In other cases, you talk about promoting things happen. And it's not clear that there's a deliberate intention to differentiate between the two. And I think that's important. Another thing that I think that is really important is at times you're very specific, or maybe more specific than you need to be about what you want to do. One of the things I think about is environment. And so you'll talk about clean air or something like that. And what you're really, I think, looking to do is say that you're going to have a clean environment, because it's really broader than just clean air as you read other parts. And I think that can be kind of confusing. Maybe if you could be careful about the way that you structure things, so that use the specifics to talk about metrics to get there, but use general terms if your intention is to be very general in terms of trying to take on a particular issue. And again, thank you for your work that went into this.
Thank you. And we've been taking notes on all the comments and questions that have come up. So we'll also be responding to these formally in the community feedback report that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. And again, we anticipate releasing that in March, and it'll be on our project webpage as well. We have 2 minutes left, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate it. As you digest and as you think about things, please feel free to reach out to the Plan Forward ffx@publicinput.com email address. Again, that's our central email address where we're tracking all input and comments received. As Larry mentioned, we've been taking what we've heard and trying to incorporate it into the staff recommendations. So hopefully, we will keep that ball rolling, and hopefully you'll see your questions answered. With that, if anyone from the staff team has anything else to add, I ask that you do it now, but otherwise we can end 2 minutes early and give you back some of your lunch.
Can I just say, I've seen some really great comments in the chat, and if you can send, I know that we're noting down the chat. Is that right, Corrine?
Yes.
Everything that folks are saying. So we'll be noting those in the chat, but also if you want to expand beyond a chat length comment, please do send an email to that address on the screen, so that we can really think about it and learn more details about what you're thinking. Because some of the notes are good ideas, but they're just like a couple of lines.
And thank you. We have an in-person meeting tomorrow and another virtual meeting on Thursday evening. And if you have friends that weren't able to make it today, I'll spread the word, and we look forward to seeing you and engaging more as this process continues. Thank you, everyone.